Do you know that other than Claudia Tenney at this moment, there are no candidates or proposed candidates that have a declared position on really almost anything, but especially on gun control, other than Mr. Gordon, who was on your program on the 4th, I believe it was.
Mm-hmm.
He made one sentence that he was against the SAFE Act. Of course, he has no documented comment about the SAFE Act since 2013. He has no position on the Second Amendment whatsoever. George Phillips, who ran in 2010 against Maurice Hinchey before the New York 22nd got redistricted, has made no mention of the SAFE Act, of the Second Amendment, or protecting the rights of many Americans, millions and millions of Americans. I just found it really interesting. Even Anthony Picente, Mr. Picente, who just won his 3rd term, on his 2015 website, makes no mention of gun control or New York SAFE Act, although his remarkable support of Governor Cuomo may be his statement about that. I don't know.
Talking with political commentator Mike Vasquez on the Talk of the Town at 100.7 FM WUTQ.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, Mike, due to the fact of the 22nd congressional boundaries. I think that's going to be a big topic for those folks. They're really, they're really concerned with holding their Second Amendment and the ability to be able to bear arms. And as you mentioned, Claudia, very vocal against the SAFE Act, making a statement yesterday, I believe, in regards to the president's reaction to this, saying he pretty much is dismantling the Second Amendment here. So I do find that interesting. Mr. Phillips, has he made a comment, or is there anything from his end?
No one has. No one's made a comment. No one's made a comment. No, like I said, I went back to 2013 in the case of Mr. Phillips to 2010 looking for comments from anybody. There is none. None of the potential people who have been spoken about, including I should correct this. Assemblyman Brindisi, Anthony Brindisi, did vote against the New York SAFE Act.
Sure, he blocked the bill, I believe. His vote. Well, his vote was.
No, but he did vote against it. It did go through without the rest of the Democrats pushed it through, and he did. And I should say he did in March of 2015. He did put up a bill to repeal the SAFE Act, which he allowed to then he didn't support it at all, and allowed it to be able to die before it could get to the floor. So it was a wonderful show of display of Second Amendment support, although his record doesn't support that at all, and he's rated 79% by the NRA.
And in blocking that bill, though, in the repeal of that, was he on a committee to do so in that form or fashion?
No, that was a bill he put out. It was the first bill he had ever put out to repeal the bill. And like I said, he let it die. He didn't, when it came up for the committee review to get put into the assembly to actually be spoken about on the floor, he didn't come to support it. He didn't argue about it. He let it die. That's actually documented. There's a video on YouTube showing that. That was April of 2015. So that makes me believe he was doing it for the show. He wanted some attention. Because otherwise, why wouldn't you support your own bill?
You mentioned Claudia Tenney, her press release from just yesterday, actually. The headline from that press release is Obama's unilateral action diminishes the Second Amendment. That's her headline, by the way, from her official press release.
Right, and I believe that's absolutely true. I mean, when we have President Obama himself said, this is not going to make people safer. This is not going to actually prevent anything. If we look at, he loves to talk about gun violence. Some 30,000 people die of gun violence in the nation every year. Well, he leaves out a couple of things. About 22,000 of them are because of gun suicides. We have another 8,000 that are gang violence. And there's roughly about 1,700 people who die because of mass shootings or other gun violence. 1,700 out of 312 million people in America. That's a ridiculous fraction. If you think about the assault weapons, which many Democrats want to go against, they're responsible for 0.2% of all gun violence. We're not talking about So all these legislations he's talking about, which already exist, which didn't prevent anything in San Bernardino, where they have even stricter, everything he's asking for and more existed, didn't protect anyone. We're not helping to protect America.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Obama's speech from yesterday. We have a brief clip here to share with our audience and with you in which he invokes the memories of Newtown and other recent tragedies. Check this out right here from President Obama.
Every time I think about those kids, it gets me mad. And by the way, it happens on the streets of Chicago every day.
President Obama getting emotional about that, actually shedding a tear. I don't know if it was genuine or not. What were your feelings and reactions to his speech yesterday?
I won't doubt that President Obama is genuine in his belief. That's fantastic, and it's a good thing. But using children and his emotions to sell the violation of our Constitution is selling our rights on the cheap. That's my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. I believe that Assemblywoman Claudia Tenney was correct, that we have to protect our Constitution. We have to protect our rights. No one is against protecting our children. No one is against protecting Americans from the mentally ill and those criminals who have an intent to try and harm others. But the legislation that's being put out there doesn't do that. Not only did President Obama say that yesterday, there's a very unpublicized, but it's out there, CNN video from 2013, February, by Vice President Biden as he talks to the media, and he said, in talking about the 23 unconstitutional executive orders at that time, they're not going to change anything. The Vice President said that himself. It's not going to change anything. It's not going to save anyone. It's not going to reduce the amount of violence that we're seeing or the mass shootings. Then why are we doing this? Why aren't we focusing on things that actually help? I believe, and that's, in looking at our congressional candidates, the only person who's actually also said the same thing, that we need to focus on a real solution. The only one who's documented with that, Claudia Tenney, which I find very interesting, because if they want to be our congressman, why isn't anyone else telling us where they stand?
All right. Mike Vasquez joining us, the political commentator at 100.7 FM, WUTQ.
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate you weighing in. I know you did throw your support behind Claudia last time when you bowed out of the race. Now we see Assemblywoman Claudia Tenney and George Phillips as the Republicans in this race at this point. Mr. Gordon, the Democrat, throwing his hat in the ring. What do you see next? What do you think is the next move?
Yeah. How many more? How many more do you think will enter?
I expect one more name to come out by next week on the Republican side. And about that same time, I would expect to hear the Democrat, which should be coming out about next week as well. That should be the full course that we're going to have available to us. And I think it's going to be very interesting as they try to present us suddenly why they're all running. All right, I'm watching it very carefully, as you can tell. I'm looking at everything they've done before and up till now, and I think that's important.
So Griffo, Picente, Brindisi?
And by your own poll, I think Mr. Griffo has no chance. Your own poll showed him as having, 14%, not even 14%.
Of course, he hadn't entered the race yet.
He hadn't entered the race, true, but I'm just looking at, and these are unofficial polls, of course.
Mm-hmm, right.
But the interest of most of the people in your area, and I can tell you down south, here in the southern tier, they all have a long way to go.
Okay.
None of them have name recognition except for Claudia Tenney because of her run in 2014. So I see it's going to be very interesting as they try to show us what in their records justifies that they're going to be, why they should be considered.
And Mike, you bring up a good point, and maybe we can revamp this at some point, because I appreciate you did add our poll and one of the articles you wrote on your site, the Examiner.com. Maybe we can skew that poll a little bit now with the three folks that have announced that they are
good idea, Jack.
in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would be real interesting. I love listening to you guys, and I listen often.
All right.
I do use them in my articles very often. You guys do a great job.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate joining us at short notice today, and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Mike.
And a special guest joining us on the phone, Jay.
Yeah, we have him for a few minutes before he starts a press conference. Our assemblyman who signed a legislative package scaling back some provisions of the SAFE Act. about 10 months ago. It's Anthony Brindisi, and we have some, back and forth here as we just talked with Mike Vasquez out of the Binghamton area. So, good morning, Assemblyman.
Hi, guys. How are you?
How you doing?
Doing great. Maybe had some reaction to the interview that we conducted with political commentator, former politician Mike Vasquez.
Yeah, I was kind of curious. I was listening to the interview on the way in, and I heard Mr. Vasquez say that no one had commented on any of the gun legislation or the SAFE Act, and I don't know what else someone can do other than vote against the SAFE Act. I think that speaks volumes in terms of how I felt about that legislation, which I did. And then he had mentioned that I had let a bill die in committee to repeal certain parts of the SAFE Act, which just isn't true. The process in the Assembly and in the legislature and the Senate, I can propose a bill, but I don't have, if I'm not the chair of a particular committee, I don't have to say whether or not the bill comes to the floor, and I don't have the power to bring the bill to a vote in the committee. So, I think he has to just check his facts there and inform the public properly of how the process is.
And if you can give us some background on the bill that you proposed or the proposal that you had going forward there.
Well, there was actually a series of bills that Senator Seward and I had sponsored
Correct.
to repeal certain aspects of the SAFE Act. I know there's some out there that want a full repeal, and given the current climate in Albany, I just think that's impossible, and Senator Seward felt the same way. So we had come up with a series of fixes for the SAFE Act that we thought would be a little bit easier to get through the legislature. Some of them did make it through towards the end of session this last session, and hopefully going forward there'll be some further reforms. But for him to say that I just let a bill die and did not speak on a bill is misleading the public on my record.
All right. And what about the criticisms of President Obama and his proposals about gun restrictions there that might be considered unconstitutional? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think, he's got to look and see what the president did. I think when you really sit down and read what was done, really isn't too far-reaching under the executive's authority. I understand that people are upset about that, but I certainly think that there should be background checks on gun purchases, especially gun shows and places like that. I think most of the American public agrees with that.
And I know back to Mr. Vasquez, some of his comments were in regards to some of the folks that have entered this race for the 22nd Congressional District and also those rumored to enter the race. Do you think this is going to be a hot topic for that seat?
I'm sure it is. I've always been a very strong supporter of a person's right to bear arms. We live in upstate New York where people use firearms for hunting and recreational purposes or to defend their homes. I support that right to do that, and I'll continue to support that right to do that. And if it's an issue, and if I do decide to jump into the race for Congress, I'm sure it will be an issue that's discussed going forward.
Now, I know you have a press conference coming up and an initiative about the homeless, similar to what Governor Cuomo's talking about. You want to give us a little glimpse into that, Anthony?
Well, just trying to give a little bit of a plan for the local communities to be able to meet the governor's emergency declaration for local communities and not-for-profits to house homeless during the cold winter months. And part of our proposal is for the state to step in and do its part and, not put it all on the backs of the local governments and not-for-profits. So we're asking the state to open up the armories. I'm actually here in Utica today in front of the armory and the National Guard and hopefully using the National Guard, which is trained in emergency situations like the governor has declared, to step up and use the state armories as a shelter during those cold winter nights to help take some of the strain off the local communities.
Yeah, I applaud you for those efforts in response to that executive order from the governor, and I think a lot of people were scrambling to figure out what to do and how to perform the tasks that were at hand now for them to get the homeless off the streets and into these shelters. I know it would put a burden on some of these folks.
Yeah, that's our plan going forward, and we'll have some more information about it for you down the road.
Yeah, a little bit of sneak peek into that press conference with Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi on the telephone with us on the Talk of the Town. Quickly, NFL team you're supporting now that the Giants, Jets, and Bills are out for the playoffs. Do you care?
No. Well, my team is Washington, so I hope they'll go forward and do well.
Oh, so Redskins fan, very good. So be watching with interest there with your team in action for the first round of the playoffs. Very good.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
All right, man.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, appreciate it. Anthony Brindisi, you can tell a lot of stuff going on there with the Assemblyman.
Yeah.
Glad he carved out just a few moments for us on the phone there to respond to Mr. Vasquez as Mr. Brindisi gets set for his press conference.
Yeah, literally standing there talking
Right.
to him. He was waiting, actually, I think, to start talking.
I know.
And some of the press was backing up, so they probably wanted to get him on time.
Great job, and I know you were jockeying back and forth with the Assemblyman there via text message in order to bring that little conversation about Jay. Good job there. Good job.